Hello, welcome to session 3, part 1. In this session, I'm going to be talking to you about how to put a perfectly flat surface on a two-sided oil stone. And in the second half, we're going to be using wet and dry paper and a honing guide to put a razor sharp edge on both your plane iron and your two chisels. And then in session 3, part 2, we're going to be using the same honing guide, but this time we'll be using it on a two-sided oil stone. The reason I'm going to such lengths is that if you have really sharp tools, you're going to have a much more comfortable time than if you have tools that are vaguely sharp. Razor sharp is the secret. Here's the setup. First of all, I'm going to put a non-slip mat over the surface of my Workmate, and that will stop it moving around. This is 6mm glass, and it was originally the sliding doors of a bookcase. It's something that if you went to your local glass merchant you could certainly get cut, but it's got a dead flat surface and that's what we're after. The next thing I'll need is some pre-soaked wet and dry, and this I've chosen is 120 grit, and that will stick to the surface of the plate glass. And I can then take my stone and work on it just by moving it backwards and forwards. Eventually that will stick to the plate glass. And to keep it wet, which is important, you need to get yourself a spray bottle with water in it, because what you want to do is to flood the surface of that continually through the process, so the slurry that's coming off is floated away. And it won't take long before the surface of that wet and dry is blunt, and it's worth investing in maybe 7 or 8 sheets if you've got a lot of dressing to do, so that you're not wasting your energy trying to get a surface back on your stone using blunt wet and dry paper. And so that you don't end up dropping that slurry onto your floor, I find that a sponge is ideal for soaking that up, and you can squeeze it back into the bucket that you're keeping the wet and dry in, like that. And you keep on going until a substantial part of your life has elapsed and you're ending up with a surface that is dead flat. Now, this is what a plane iron looks like if you've sharpened it on a cupped oil stone. And I'm trying to get it in the light so you can see the edge of it. That's probably showing you what I need you to see. Can you see that front edge is curved and it should be dead straight? That's known as the sharpening angle, that front edge of it. The main angle on there is the grinding angle. So what I've got to do with that blade is to re-establish the grinding angle to get rid of that curved front edge. And I'm going to use the same technique as I used to dress the stone. In order to sharpen that blade on a piece of wet and dry, I'm going to use a thing called a honing guide. And this is a Draper product too, and this is a decent Draper product, it's worth getting. On the end of it, it tells me the information that I need to set the blade up in the honing guide. I've taken a steel rule and I've put a mark at 38mm and another mark at 50mm. I can then put my plane iron into the honing guide, do up that screw and check that it's settled flat into the body of the guide. I can then start with my grinding angle, which has a projection of 50mm. So that's now in place. I've got my projection and I'm going to work on this larger of those two angles. So same idea, 120 grit wet and dry. Keep it wet. And I keep on going until I've got rid of that sharpening angle. And quite rapidly, because it's quite coarse wet and dry paper, that's going. You see? Only got a little bit to go. That has now got rid of everything that was on the edge of that blade. Good, I'm pleased. Having re-established that grinding angle at 25 degrees and having made sure that I've got a burr all the way along the back, there's a slight raised area that I can feel. Checked it's at 90 degrees to the edge of the blade and no trace of what used to be the sharpening angle there. I'm going to put a piece of 360 grit, wet and dry, on here because I want that surface not to be as rough as it is. It was quite a coarse piece of wet and dry I was using, and if I was to look at that under a microscope there'd be lots of grooves in that surface that would end up at the edge looking a bit like teeth, the edge of a comb, something like that. And a perfectly sharp surface is dead straight and polished. There's no sign of any scratches in it. So if I try and put a sharpening angle or a micro bevel on the edge of that, there's just a chance that I'd have some of those deep scratches left in there that would make the edge less than perfect. So I'm going to change to a finer grit, 360 grit, re-establish the correct projection for the blade. Now because we're only removing the surface scratches, we don't have to put quite as much time and effort into it. And I don't know whether you can see, but that edge is now much shinier than it was. But what I want to do now is get rid of that burr, being careful that I keep the blade absolutely flat. I can now no longer feel that. That's fine. Good. Last stage. We're going to swap the 360 grit wet and dry for a piece of 1000 grit, and we're going to put the sharpening angle on it. Settle my blade in the honing guide, get the approximate projection that we need. I've got my 38mm mark still present on my Workmate. Tighten it up. Spray of water. And this won't take long because we're only putting about 1/4 millimetre of edge on that. And we're just doing it sufficiently to get a little burr brought up on the underside of that iron. When you can feel that burr, I can't quite yet, not all the way across. Now I can, there's a burr all the way across there. What we need to do is to take that out of the guide and very carefully making sure that we don't lift that iron off the surface, keep it absolutely flat, we remove that burr. And already that will probably be sharp enough to shave with. But before we finish with the process, what I want to do is to use a strop on there to turn that very sharp surface. Just try and shave. Yep, it's working. So you turn that very sharp surface into a very, very sharp surface. And that's the next bit. This is a strop I was talking about. It consists of a flat surface onto which I've stuck a piece of leather. And that leather's stuck on with double-sided tape. So what I've done is put strips of double-sided tape so they're not overlapping. So it keeps that flat surface. And then I've stretched that leather over the surface of the flat surface. And all I did was to joint in a piece to hold it in a vise. Even that's not essential. If you use a non-slip mat, you'll be able to use that perfectly adequately. So this is what the leather looked like. Piece of old handbag that I cut up, and the flat surface could be a piece of MDF like that you could find in a skip in your local area very easily, I'm sure. Onto that flat surface and onto that leather, you then need to apply polishing compound, which looks like that. It's something you can buy online. And apply a little bit of that polishing compound to the leather. I'm going to find the angle that I need to polish, so that's my grinding angle. If I lift it about 5 degrees, that'll be my sharpening angle. And all I'm going to do, pressing quite hard, is pull that towards me, trying to keep the angle as it is. A number of times until I can see that the whole surface is becoming shinier. Get back to that angle, lift it slightly, so that's my 25 degrees, that'll be my 30 degrees. That's what I'm after. And that is probably enough. And lastly, I must pull that flat edge flat over the back, just to polish off anything on the back there. And that feels already, before I start shaving with it, sharper. If you haven't got hairy arms, I don't know how you're going to do this. You have to find somebody with hairy arms, maybe on a dating site. You could put it in what you're after, and maybe wait until the second date before you bring out your chisel. There you are, sharp enough to shave with. I'm well happy with that, and that should do a nice job on that pallet wood.